Hello, everyone. Welcome to LGBTQ in Japan. My name is Jan. I am part of the South Florida panel group known as Nerds Know. The subtitle for this panel is called The Yuri on Ice Problem, but it is actually, I just want to make it clear that this is actually not a Yuri on Ice bashing panel. When I conceived the idea for this panel, the show had reached critical acclaim, and I felt like instead of settling for Yuri on Ice and being like proud of it and happy about its supposed progress on the subject matter, that we should be demanding more. And I want to explain a little bit of my reasoning into why that is. So that is what this whole panel is about. Here is a brief rundown of some of the things that we're going to be covering. LGBTQ live in silence. They are not exactly persecuted, but they aren't really protected, which we'll go over in the next slide. I want to talk about the concept of plausible deniability because I think it's very important in understanding how LGBTQ people live in Japan and what that has to do with anime and Japanese media. Then we'll go over some caricatures, so this includes things like how makeup and, one's personality or the way that they speak kind of portrays, how LGBTQ are portrayed. And we'll also talk about romanticized versions. This definitely includes yaoi and yuri genres, and we'll kind of go over those. Lastly, I do want to round out with some cultural callbacks. So this includes samurai culture, theater culture, and we'll go over the koseki, the family registry system, just a little bit. Just before we get into it, I do want to let you know we are not going to be talking about anything explicit, but I would say that this panel is like PG-13, so parental advisory, is encouraged. Obviously everybody is different, so if you think that, maybe your parent should be present, or if you believe that this may be too sensitive for your children to watch, then, you make up that decision for yourself. We are going to be discussing sexuality and gender. And some of these terms and concepts, they might make some parents uncomfortable. So I just want you to be advised. You get to make your own decisions. So let us go ahead and jump into it. First, let's look at a brief rundown of some of the major LGBTQ laws and their status in Japan. So there are no laws that forbid LGBTQ relationships or activity, which is good. There are no anti-discrimination laws. That's bad. Same-sex marriage is not legal. Obviously not good. Adoption by same-sex couples is not legal. I do have a tilde here before my X, and the reason for that is because there is a bit of a legal loophole, which we will discuss in a minute. Support for surrogacy or in vitro fertilization for same-sex couples is not accessible, so that's bad. LGBTQ are not are allowed to serve in the military. Again, I have a tilde here. It is allowed, which is great, but there's a little bit of like a caveat to that, so we'll talk about that in a minute. MSM. So MSM stands for biological males who have sex with other biological males. They are not allowed to donate blood for 6 months. Again, I have this as a kind of a good thing because of reasons that I will explain in a minute. And conversion is allowed and conversion therapy is banned, which is fantastic. So, just kind of looking over those statistics, we can see that generally their scorecard leans to not so great. Even some of their good points kind of have caveats. And basically, being queer isn't really illegal, and being in a relationship isn't illegal, but there aren't really laws protecting individuals, from like being fired from their job or evicted from their home or other discrimination, and that is like a really big deal. So I just kind of want to give you like an idea, right? Obviously, if there is a violent crime, it will be persecuted. There are plenty of convictions for violent crimes, regardless of the subject matter involved. However, let's say that you experience violence, right? You're gay, right? And you experience violence in Japan. You might not want to report it or like do something about it, because then you're going to have to state why, or even, the person that you are accusing might have to state why, and that could be effectively outing you, which is not necessarily something that you want to have happen. And also, because there are no anti-discrimination laws in place, there really isn't a law against the hate of queer folk. So the crime might not even stick. And, or like the person, let's say they do get punished, they might, the punishment might not be harsh enough, and you as the victim could very well be harassed again, or even have to see and work with that person all over again. So it's very sketchy, and it's really hard for you to do that because you're not really in a position that protects you. And so that is why that's just really, really hard. So to get on to my first tilde there about adoption, um, in the current state of the Japanese constitution, marriage is between a man and a woman. And similarly, there is no law allowing queer folk to adopt, but there's also no law banning it. So there have really been no cases of people trying. It could be that it's possible and that there is no issue, but we just really don't have too many cases of people trying. And that kind of goes into like a whole nother panel about feminism in Japan. But regardless, just know that that's kind of where they're standing right now. And similarly, there's no access to surrogacy for male couples or in vitro fertilization for female couples who wish to have a child. And all of these things have roots in the culture, which we're going to talk about later on. So adoption is kind of a gray zone in Japan regarding LGBTQ. Queer folk aren't banned, going on to my next one, from serving in the military. But there's not really an encouragement for them to join either. And there's actually been a lot of studies on this topic by both Japanese nationals and foreign researchers, and most concluded that a high percentage of Japanese don't object to open queer folk serving, so long as it doesn't interfere with their performance, which I think is pretty normal. That's like relatively normal. I mean, even if you're like in a more kind of sort of politicized field like journalism, that's not coming up every single story that you do or every single time that you walk into the office, because you're more than just your sexuality. Like, yes, this is a part of you, and yes, it has a place in your life, but not always every single time you go to work. So the idea of, oh yeah, sure, let them serve so long as it doesn't interfere with anything is kind of also silly, because no duh. Moving on. The MSM ban. So I put this as kind of good. Um, in America, which is where I'm from, 6 months, this rule is still in place, but it's actually 12 months instead of 6 months. However, I still think this is relatively bad because it still discriminates against biological males, and it's dumb. Like, if you look at the law, this law was enacted in order to prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS, and this, I mean, if you think you have that, then you have that. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need 6 months to figure that out. So it just seems, really dumb that this law is in place. And there's a variety of reasons why I encourage you to check out, like, the American Red Cross to look more into their reasoning, although it truly doesn't make sense to me. But to round out our last bit regarding the conversion therapy, gender conversion is allowed. So you can actually legally change your gender after surgery in Japan. And conversion therapy, the idea that you can like be straight or normal with therapy, is banned, which is actually super awesome. So that is definitely all pluses. Before we move on, I do have this picture here. It's probably one of my favorite pictures from some of the Tokyo Rainbow Pride parades. The first sign there with the rainbow banner says "We are gay cousins." So the two of these gentlemen are both gay and they are cousins. The second sign in Japanese says, "I want to walk with my partner like a human." And at the bottom, "I want to spread LGBTQ awareness to my hometown." And I think this is really interesting, this first sentence. "I want to walk with my partner like a human," as though being LGBTQ in Japan, and being in a relationship with someone is so foreign to them, like alien like. And how he just wants to be treated like any other person. um, and I really do think that that kind of illustrates quite clearly how being LGBTQ is like in Japan. So moving right merrily along, we have plausible deniability. So this scene is actually the first scene in the show that sparked my nerve and encouraged me to essentially make this panel to talk about this topic. So plausible deniability is the ability to deny knowledge of something because of a lack of significant evidence. So because you didn't see it happen, it didn't, or because they didn't say it clearly, it's not fact. And you know, there's no protection from discrimination in Japan, so a lot of LGBTQ people feel that they can't be themselves in the open, and this is how plausible deniability has become so rampant among LGBTQ in the general population. So this kissing scene, which, like I said, at the time that I made this panel, everybody was talking about, everybody was so happy. It won an anime award for most heartwarming scene in 2016. I was furious. Like, I chastised this scene heavily. And, most people agree when they look at these scenes that it was definitely 100% a kiss. But there is still doubt, even among a lot of supporters. I saw heated debates over, yeah, but are we sure? And I mean, okay, they've got the glossy lips and, their eyes are overlapping. It's probably a kiss, but it's still a maybe. You still just don't know. And that is because it's just not shown. And so I have to say to myself, like, what are the creators trying to show by disguising this kiss? Like, what was the point? Why not just show it? And the only thing that I can think about is that, it must be because they don't want to face the same discrimination that queer folk face, in Japan by living out in the open. And I do want to say that, yes, for those of you who are diehard Yuri on Ice fans and clicked on this video because you were, like, angry that I was going to bash the show, which I'm not. I'm really, truly not trying to bash the show. I'm just trying to point out some issues, the problems that it has. So the Blu-ray release of this show did alter this scene, reanimate it to be explicitly clear that they kissed, but I do have to argue that not everybody buys the discs. And this version, this censored version, was what aired on Japanese television and what is still streamed online today. So I don't care that it's on the Blu-ray. It doesn't change. The damage has already been done, is basically like my stance on the matter. So this is a quote from Cecilia de Anastasio. She is a senior reporter at Kotaku. You can read this full review in one of the links in the description, the first link in the description. But the quote goes, "Yuri on Ice's queerness is handled with a great deal more grace, but I do wonder why Victor's arm blocks his kiss with Yuri in the first place. Anime has broadcasted gay kisses before. Two of Shin Sekayori's male protagonists kissed. It was an organic, loving kiss." And so this second anime that they're talking about, Shin Sekayori, is an award-winning sci-fi anime, and the kiss was a proper one. Lips involved and everything. But the show wasn't mainstream like Yuri on Ice is. So That's the big difference. You know, Yuri on Ice, everybody knows about it, even people that are not into ice skating, that are not into, you know, yaoi or BL or, you know, whatever. They're not into any of that stuff, but they are aware of Yuri on Ice. Everybody knows about it. And so the fact that, you know, it was censored is just such an annoying fact about it. So, that brings me to my next aggravating moment, which was the rings. So this is again another example of plausible deniability. The rings here are not given as a sign of matrimony or engagement. The closest they come to any level of commitment is that they are a promise from Yuri that he will continue to do his best to impress Victor, and for Victor to bring him luck. Which is laughable, in my opinion. It's just a mockery of, like, marriage. Um, and this is further kind of solidified when in the next panel, Victor admits to the rest of the skaters that the rings are engagement rings. And Yuri protests that. No, they're not. It's just a promise. Like, 100% protests, which is like, really? Um, and then in this third scene, there at the bottom, you can see all the other ice skaters and their reaction to this idea that they're engagement rings, even though Yuri is protesting against that. The only other skater who isn't shocked or disgusted is the other actual gay guy. He's like, oh, that's nice. Even though he shouldn't be. He should be frustrated and angry. Like, make up your mind, Victor. Like, same with you, Yuri. Like, figure it out. And of course, JJ, who's sitting there angrily clapping, turns this idea into a competition, which is the biggest mockery of marriage of them all. Being as Victor says that the two will get married once Yuri gets gold, and so JJ is like, well, I get gold first, then I'm gonna get married before you, which, yeah, not how you do marriage. But again, plausible deniability, because even though Victor admits to them being something more, Yuri, who is the one who bought them and gave them out, does not ever. So that is a big deal. So I don't want you to listen to me speaking. Obviously, I live in America. I am American. I want you to hear from actual Japanese people and their thoughts and their feelings on the matter. So I have a couple of interviews listed down below. This first one is with Tubby Eats. They're a YouTube channel. Actually, all of these are from YouTube. But Asian Boss is a YouTube channel, and Hiroko interviews Shinichi and Satoshi from Tubby Eats. She explores what it's like to be gay in a conservative society like Japan. And the two have been dating for 17 years. I met through an online dating site. It's a very interesting interview. I've got it time-stamped to where I think the most poignant information is, but please feel free to check out the whole interview. Similarly, I have an additional interview with where Kay from Asian Boss sits down with Eito and Kanata from the YouTube channel Kit Channel. And Kay explores what it's like to be transgender in a conservative society like Japan with the pair. So again, the most poignant is time-stamped below, but please feel free to check out the full interview. I really love both of these interviews, and I think it's much better to hear from actual Japanese people about what it's like to be gay or, you know, transgender, rather than just hear from me. Like, don't take my word for it. Check it out for yourselves. But moving on to caricatures. So, more often than not, when queer folk are represented in anime or other Japanese media, it's in the form of a caricature. So that kind of means a grossly exaggerated version of the common like striking characteristics of those people. So some of these characteristics could be flamboyant, a lot of over-the-top makeup, over-the-top costumes. They might fit into tropes like okama and onabe, or like fitting into the tropes of just being like transvestites or being drag queens. They usually are excessively flirty, especially for no apparent reason, and they're often the brunt of jokes. Um, so okama which I have listed there as one of the tropes, is a trope in Japanese media, and it really refers to an effeminate man, or like a male transvestite, so a man who likes to dress like a woman. And onabe is like a big pot. And it's kind of the opposite. It's like the female version of, I guess it's like a tomboy, really. A girl who likes to dress and act like a guy, I guess, is how you would put it. So I have two examples here. Emporio Ivankov, who is the Okama king in One Piece, which is pretty on par with the Okama stereotype. He's got really ridiculous makeup, crazy hair, a wacky costume. He kind of looks like Doc, I can't remember his name, but the main guy from Rocky Horror Picture Show. He basically looks like he stepped out of Rocky Horror Picture Show, or is a Japanified version of it. And even his power is like kind of, frankly, upsetting. So he is definitely this like embodiment of this trope. And then to a lesser extent, we have Fire Emblem, whose real name is Nathan Seymour, from Tiger and Bunny. Now, I know many of you probably have not heard of Tiger and Bunny, but Tiger and Bunny is actually a hugely popular show in Japan. Very, very, very popular show in Japan. So these are both of these characters are in widely popular, very well-known shows in their country. So Nathan here, definitely they fit a lot of these tropes. Their superhero name is Fire Emblem, so you could definitely see the connection there to flamboyant. You also can see that they wear a lot of makeup, and their normal clothing is definitely over the top, even kind of sort of a costume. I also would say that for sure I would be able to confirm that they do tend to flirt with a bunch of people for seemingly no apparent reason, and does occasionally become the brunt of jokes. I will say that, this is not to say that normal queer folk don't exist in anime, but usually not in mainstream shows. Like I said, these two are from very, very popular shows, and it just seems again that the creators are afraid to show legitimate, multifaceted queer characters. Nathan does get a bit of a backstory to kind of like humanize them and make them more than their personage, but it's one episode in a whole series, so it can hardly be considered a proper character. We also have romanticized versions. So, like any niche, queer folk have been romanticized as well as caricaturized. In mainstream media, the state queer folk is similar to real life situations in Japan. So, what do I mean by that? Toya and Yukito here from Cardcaptor Sakura. Some might consider this kind of depiction to be queer baiting, right? Oh, they must be dating. And then other people are like, nah, they're not dating. Plausible deniability. we don't know that they're dating. They never say that they love each other. You're finding queer where it's not, but it is. And so what I mean by that is that, they're not wrong to say that that could very well be queer baiting, but the situation, as I've already described, is a lot more complicated than is, than it seems at first glance. So queer baiting might really only be the way that queer folk can even be slightly represented in media, which is very sad. So on that note, it doesn't mean that all instances of queer folk in media are good ones. Yaoi and Yuri are some of the most popular romanticized media that queer folk dominate. Yaoi in particular is problematic because of its romanticization. So yaoi is actually made by straights, usually women, for other straights who are again usually women. They objectify gay men. They present a heteronormative view of a relationship through the concept of seme and uke, personality types, and body types. And seme and uke are terms used in martial arts, actually, and some other sports. They basically mean attacker and receiver respectively. So seme are usually bigger, more aggressive, more manlier types, while the uke are more passive, smaller, and effeminate types. Uh, this is true both of their romance and sexual relationships. Um, basically all throughout their romantic and sexual relationships. Shonenai, and shoujoi for that matter, but we'll talk about that in a little bit, are considered more sophisticated stories, quote unquote. There's usually no sexual encounters because the characters tend to be younger, but they're still pretty fetishized. It's basically like cute boys in relationships. Eee, so cute. Like, why? Why are you doing that? That's weird. There are genres that are for queer folk, and Bada is one of those. So, Bada means rose, and it's a genre specifically made by gay men for other gay men. It does have less of a heteronormative structure. The seme and uke roles are still present, but usually inverted. So by that I mean that the body types are more masculine for both of the parties, and the personalities are a bit more normal, though the uke is still more often than not represented as shy, unsure, or reluctant. And the genre is still focused on eroticism than highlighting queer folk exactly, but it is progress. Lastly, we have Yuri. So Yuri means lily, and it's a common name for females, like Jane or Mary or Susan. And the whole genre tends to focus on lesbian relationships. Yuri is a little bit less and also more complicated than its male equivalent. So Yuri is the only term used to describe lesbian relationships. I previously talked about shoujoi, but shoujoi is actually an American terminology derived from shonenai, and it's meant to denote the same kind of less explicit relationships, but that's not the case in Japan. Yuri can be just as subtle and sweet and fetishized as yaoi and shonenai, or more realistic and explicit like bada. So, very crazy range there. Now, one thing I would like to highlight about Yuri in comparison is not just this diversity, which does surely exist in real life, effeminate men in aggressive roles, or tom girls as butch lesbians, or cute guys just happening to be gay. Totally real, that has happened for sure in real life. But Yuri broke what Yuri on Ice hoped to break into the mainstream. So we have lots of examples here. Haruka and Michiru from Sailor Moon are the OG lesbians. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Although I think nowadays, after, gosh, how many years has it been since the original Sailor Moon came over to America? I think it was like 1998 or something, 1996. So we have had many years now to go back and revisit Sailor Moon and be like, nah, that whole cousin stuff was just BS. And so, and kind of rewrite that. Um, we also have here on the previous page, I had Utana and Anthe, Tomoyo and Sakura here. I want to show you these diverse types of lesbians. Tomoyo in particular, she is a lesbian. She loves her best friend Sakura. Sakura doesn't feel the same way. She's in love with Shaoran. And so, Bob's her uncle, that kind of thing. But Tomoyo doesn't turn around and make it weird, like how a lot of people think it will happen if you're friends with a lesbian and you're not lesbian. Nope, she doesn't make it weird at all. She's like, well, Sakura is still my best friend. I still want her to be happy. Obviously I love her, but that also means, supporting her as best I can. And so even though she is a lesbian, she has a very healthy and wonderful relationship with her female friend. And I think that's really cool. Now, that's not to say that caricatures of lesbians don't also exist in mainstream, especially in mainstream. So think about characters like Blair from Soul Eater or Mio from Keijo, and lots of the characters in Kill la Kill. A lot of these characters don't fit some of the previously mentioned signs of caricatures, but this is mostly because women usually wear crazy makeup or like often dress outrageously. So, like, that's pretty normal. So, you can't base a lot of the caricature signs for female characters based on like their appearance. A lot of it really boils down to their actual characteristics, being overly touchy-feely, especially without permission, hitting on all girls for the sake of hitting on them, and are just generally there for fan service, not really mentioning much, if anything, about their real true feelings. Um, and so that's, so don't think Yuri is without its problems. It does have problems, but they're just different. and they're harder to notice right off the bat. Okay, next we're going to talk about cross-dressing. Especially for trans people, this is really common and widely accepted, actually. There's actually a cultural history here, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that makes this kind of behavior, if you will, one of the most normal things for Japanese people to accept. And we see a lot of cross dressing in various Japanese media. From Rui in Gatchaman Crowds, from Momiji in Fruits Basket, Haku, sorry, in Naruto, and these examples here, Bridget from Guilty Gear, James and Jesse from Pokemon, and Hana from Tokyo Godfathers. Many of these characters usually don't really make clear what their gender are, but Hana, for instance, is 100% trans. We know that Jesse and James seem to be straight, but we don't even know that, right? We don't have a clear cut. No one of them has ever said, I'm this. It just doesn't happen. And in a complete opposite turn, we have Bridget, who has definitely, without a doubt, clearly stated that his gender is male. He just wears female clothes. That's how he rolls. There's a reason for it. But regardless, the point is that the ease with which trans are accepted as whatever they are may have something to do with this idea that they're easy to pass. They can pass easily. And that could also be, similar body types between all Japanese, little hair, little muscle, similar heights, that kind of thing. Obviously, there are standouts. There are plenty of people that don't fit that mold, but the majority are like that. And then, of course, it is easy to get hormones and surgery, and after that, easy to get your records changed, and then no one ever has to, question or be concerned or whatever. Um, and so that is a really big step. One of the other factors that I think is really helpful is that the Japanese language inherently doesn't rely on pronouns as much as we do. So very little requires anyone to say like she or he. And there are a lot of gender neutral words. So you could say my boyfriend, kareshi, or my girlfriend, kanojo. But if you didn't want to denote anyone's gender, you could just say koibito, which is like literally the person that you love or the person that you're crushing on or whatever, like my koibito. And that doesn't have anything to do with gender. So all of those things, I'm sure, contribute. So to continue on, we're going to talk a little bit now about the history behind homosexual and bisexual acceptance. So, for example, in the feudal era, samurai, monks, and other tradesmen would have apprentices. And this sort of mentorship was taken extremely seriously, and and in most cases, an actual contract would be written up. So the mentor would be considered responsible for their apprentice completely. They would live with them, they would eat with them, they would teach them, not just the skill, but also like basic things, how to read, how to write, manners, social etiquette, stuff like that. Sometimes, this extended into the bedroom as well, but not always. If it did, both parties would agree to it prior to anything happening, it would be added to the contract and again signed. So it was a written, signed, kind of consensual aspect of their relationship. I know that sounds really weird, but I don't want you thinking this is totally weird, as even for us in the West, before the introduction of the Abrahamic religions, this was really common. Um, and then for Japan, once the Abrahamic religions were introduced, it actually still wasn't persecuted until 500 years plus from Christianity's indoctrination into society. So that's just crazy. Like, none of the persecution had to happen, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Two other major art forms of entertainment also contributed to queer behaviors in the country, if you will. Kabuki, which is the bottom picture here, was and still is today a classical theater show. It in its original form in the 1600s, all of the actors were female, and they would play any role, male or female, elder or child, didn't make a difference. It became very popular with the nobility, and as with anything, began to trickle down to the lower classes of society. The most accessible version of this being for the middle class, which unfortunately really was only obtainable in red light districts. Now, before we get on to that, I want to talk a little bit about how kabuki, many aspects of kabuki, such as the fashion, the makeup, the music, the actors themselves, became so popular that they would have merchandise, souvenirs, stuff like that. It was basically like kabuki was basically the first form of popular culture in Japan. That's how popular it was. Um, and so this association with red light districts kind of made the idea of prostitution related to kabuki. And so because of that, and also because, middle class is in a lower class kind of area, but the upper class still enjoy the art form. And so, maybe you're not like royalty, but maybe you're like a merchant class, so you would go and you would take a look. All of these different classes are intermingling together. There's like this idea with prostitution because it's in a red light district. Basically, it pissed off a lot of people. The shogun ended up banning female kabuki, and male only kabuki was born. A lot of them were like, we still love kabuki. We love the idea of kabuki. So we want to keep doing it. And if the only way for us to do it is for us men to do it, then we're going to do it. And so just as before, all the roles were played by men only. Female or male roles would go to regular men, and boys would play the younger roles of either gender. Now, women were not discouraged. They loved the stage, they were not daunted, and in the early 1900s, they finally created a new form called takarazuka, named for the first place they ever performed. These were much more modern drama and plays, and so they became really popular. They continued on today doing stage adaptations of popular movies, anime, or topical currents, while kabuki continues to focus on historical or legendary stories. So in my two pictures here, the top picture is an all-female cast of the play for Rurouni Kenshin. So most of the people in that picture are supposed to be boys, they're supposed to be guys. They're all women. They are fabulous and beautiful. And down below, we have a kabuki poster. Again, all of these characters, even though we have two there that are supposed to be women, they are all played by men. And so this is, again, this kind of cultural idea of cross-dressing not really being a big deal. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about koseki. We don't have too much time, and koseki could be a panel all on its own. Here's what you need to know. The koseki is the family registry system. It is required by law. It acts as a person's proof of residence, birth certificate, death certificate, uh, marriage certificate, all of that stuff. It logs households, births, paternities, adoptions, deaths, marriages, etc. there are so many problems for modern day people, from class discrimination to foreign discrimination to single parent discrimination. There's tons of stuff here. It's truly a huge feminist issue as well. But the most important to our subject, the Koseki is set up as a household registry, and therefore it's designed for a heterosexual family unit only, which is of course detrimental to most queer folk who want to marry, since the Koseki is proof of marriage, and for adoption. Although theoretically, at least one spouse could be listed as a parent. However, let's say that that spouse is in the hospital and this child is at school and they're sick and they're not feeling well and they need to be picked up. Well, the other spouse cannot come and pick the child up. So just being on one person's koseki is not good enough, which is, of course, an issue. Uh, so there's some other weird problems with the koseki. Like I previously mentioned, if you are trans and you want to correct your gender on the koseki, you can do that through the government after certain conditions have been met. But technically, even though, like, let's say you know, are a trans male and you want to marry a female, you guys would be able to do that no problem on the koseki. What's weird is that that may only be cool for trans heterosexuals who want to marry, but if you're already married and you change your gender, uh, I personally am not sure what would happen to your status on the koseki. Because obviously you would want to change your gender. Like, would you not be allowed to change your gender? Would you be allowed, but your marriage would be abolished? Like, how would that work? I don't know. If you know, if you have some sources, go ahead and put them down below. I'd be more than happy to check those out and add those to this panel and expand upon that. But yes, basically, the koseki sucks, and it should be abolished and changed into something else that's way more like person friendly. um, so that kind of concludes my panel. Before I end it, I do want to do just a brief kind of rundown of some other things in Japan. You know, I don't want this panel to confuse or discourage you. Japan does have a thriving LGBTQ community. Many of its members are still closeted in everyday life, but many people come out for the Tokyo Rainbow Pride Parade, which is the longest and largest queer folk gathering in the country. There's like 5 or 6 of them all throughout. There is, I think, a vast difference in how Japanese media reports and highlights queer folk, especially at the parades. So, on the left, we have a picture taken by Huffington Post, which is a foreign source for news. And on the right, we have a highlight photo from Japan Travel, which is a national travel website that shares events going on in Japan. And I'm not pointing this picture out to say that drag queens are not valid. They are 100% a valid part of the community, so please do not get me wrong. Pride parades are about celebrating everyone in the community, but I just find it so apropos that this is what the Japanese news outlet decided to go with. Like, hey, foreigners, check out our weird and wacky, like, LGBT folks. Like, no, what? This isn't some event that you just go to and they'll dress you up like that and all, and they'll do your wacky makeup and all that. No, like, this is supposed to be about pride, you know, in all of its entirety. So I just feel like it's very problematic. um I also have here a little bit of like kind of an update. So as of today, you know, marriage nationwide is still banned, but there have been various prefectures that have been enacting laws that create similar certificates. And this started in 2015. So Shibuya started it. They're kind of, I guess, like a county in the States. They announced plans to create a certification for same-sex couples for things like hospital visits and renting apartments, and stuff like that. They called it a proof of partnership paper, and then other prefectures followed suit. Um, this is not necessarily the best though, because it still only works within that city. So if you get a Shibuya proof of partnership program paper, it still only works in Shibuya. It wouldn't work in Setagaya or in Iga or Takarazuka or so on and so forth. So that does kind of suck. In 2018, it was announced that unisex uniforms would start to be integrated into some, though not all, schools in the country. And that was announced actually in the Japan Times, which is a nationally distributed newspaper. So that's like huge news. And the article explicitly stated that this was in part for trans students. And lastly, in 2000, I think this was also 2018. Several major companies like IBM Japan, Kirin Beer, Rakuten, Japan Tobacco, so on and so forth, have enacted policies enabling LGBTQ to take time off for marriage, childbirth, and other life-changing events that heterosexuals would normally take. I'm not really sure how they can do that, since those things do tend to be banned in Japan, but, at least they have the they're enabled to do that. Um, so yeah, basically, these are just small changes, but change is coming to Japan, and you know, uh I don't think it can't come soon enough. Like I wish it was already here. But some hope exists. So that is my panel. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, my name is Jan. You can follow me on social media under Kurahane Shizumi. That's my alias. I am with the panel group Nerds Know. We are a panel group in South Florida. We do panels all over the country. We are honored to be a part of this Pride Month's special event. So please go ahead and, if you're curious about some of the other stuff that we do, if you would like us to come to your local event, be sure to let your local event know. But thank you so much, and happy Pride Month.